Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fourth Industrial Revolution podcast. So today we have two returning superstars. We've got Olga and Dylan joining us again, and we've got a special guest today, Chad. So Chad is a longtime member of my community, one of the OG supporters. He and I have collaborated on a few projects now, the ACE framework. He's helped the Agent Forge guys, and he's just been really super involved. Now, the background for this conversation, just to kind of put a container around it to frame the whole thing, is Chad and I, one of the things that we chat about is lifestyle. How do you look after yourself? How do you find meaning and that sort of stuff? So what I really wanted to do was get him on the podcast and just kind of let's talk about AI, how it's changing our lives already, but then also part of that is how it's going to be changing our lives and how we can all adapt. And so I was really excited to get the whole crew together, because everyone has different perspectives that they can bring to this. And so, yeah, I was late, so everyone had a chance to kind of chat before we got started. But Chad, take it away. Tell us a little bit more about kind of where you're at and what you've been working on and what you're most interested in lately.
Yeah, 100%. Do we want to cover the AI stuff or more of like my sort of personal journey with my wellness and stuff? What works for you?
I would say start with AI and then transition to health and wellness and everything else.
I mean, the same thing I was telling Dylan is like, I don't have any machine learning background. And most of the work that I've done has either been like when we worked on ACE, I knew that I didn't have the skill set to be able to be working on the actual layers of intelligence. So I focused my work on building what I would call like the support system for the layers of intelligence. And it was very rewarding. It was a bit of a drag that, ACE it seems like it's kind of stalled since then, probably just because it just seems like the whole thing, everything just moves so fast that every, 20 minlike 2 weeks, people are like squirrel and you're like off to a new thing. So it's a little bit of a bummer for a person like me, who's more of an architect, like an infrastructure architect. It's probably more of my strength in terms of like my technical skills. Because that mindset is one where you really want to see the rubber meet the road. You want to see things like actually begin to work. And I think I've been having to let go of that a little more and just sort of be on the ride, So yeah, I mean, beyond that was probably the most, I'd say, salient thing I did in terms of the work I've done with you. And then just in general, I'm just trying to keep up like everybody else, honestly. I mean, agents are all the rage now, so I'm trying to figure out which agent frameworks I might examine. I'm reading scientific papers, trying to keep up. I was actually having a conversation with one of the Agent Forge guys the other day, and he was like, yeah, some of this stuff isn't really relevant to what I do. We'll send each other papers and stuff. And there was one fairly esoteric paper about model training. And I said to him, like, well, I agree. I'm probably not going to train models, but there's something about reading these papers that just expands my thinking, which I think is probably one of the most important things to do when things are moving so fast, is just to keep taking these points on the map that are a little bit further out so that I can see the broad picture, because it's just expanding so fast, And I may never use that specific like research topic that I was reading about, but maybe there's an element of that new way of thinking that I can take into the work that I do when I try to build agents or enhance my prompting or whatever like that.
Hey, Chad, so one thing we had to play on that too is because you had so much familiarity with the ACE framework, and it had those 6 different kind of layers that you said were like their own individual Docker containers. They kind of worked on their own. When you're thinking about you as a human biological agent and you're thinking, okay, I have these like lower layers of me that create chemicals and hormones like dopamine, and those don't work right if I'm not sleeping, which then kind of makes my aspirational goals harder to achieve, or it might change the way I interact with like global society. Like, have you been able to, like, is there any insights that you've noticed just from like the biological you and the ACE framework that you built?
Good. I love that question. And let me see if I can unpack it in real time. So the first thing I would say is having my foot, like 1 foot in, so I have these like 2 worlds. One is the office that you see behind me, where I kind of come in and I work on my little telecommunications company to make money, and I work on AI, and it's very like heady conceptual work. And then I go out in the woods, which I can, I guess, bring a little context to that later, but like I go out into the woods, into my sort of other life, and I'm living very close to the land, and it creates these 2 very distant points on the map that kind of, it's like I haven't met many people that do both of those things together. You're either kind of like a homesteader and you're all into that, or you're like sitting at your desk all day and you're all into AI. So I feel very,
and that would be like the
fortunate.
cognitive control layer, right? The task switching layer.
Well, when I move from one to the other, that's what it would be. Yeah. But I guess so if I map it that way, it's like I've achieved a lot of flexibility in my cognitive control layer and my ability to switch context and I know I'm doing it. I know I'm switching context, but it's so effortless now I don't even think about it. It's kind of like maybe in some social situation, you walk into a certain room and your whole system just knows, all right, I have to like shift into this other way of being in this particular context, right? And so it's very similar, except the context is just so wide. I think that's the thing that feels distinct to me is heady conceptual brain work versus like I'm entirely present with this 12-inch tree that I'm trying to cut down and not drop on my house. Like these are very different environments, require very different skill sets and awareness. But it kind of just illustrates too like the amount of neuroplasticity that humans are capable of. Because one of the distinctions I made recently was like I've always thought like, am I normal? I asked myself this question for a couple of years. Like I still don't feel normal, and then there was one just a few weeks ago. I was like, I think I am normal in the sense like I'm not a psychopath. I have normal brain chemistry and normal wants and desires. What I am is unconventional. And so I think but that unconventional mindset is part of what allows the kind of the wide points on the map in terms of the experiences I'm having.
I remember.
But I bet if anybody put themselves in the same situation I was, they would have not the exact experience because we're all wired a little differently, but I could probably point to some fundamental things that have changed in me that would be very similar to any other person who put themselves, especially in the homesteading stuff, which I'm hoping we can get into because it's just so cool.
Oh, yeah. I remember when I asked you to join the ACE Framework project, and you're like, "Are you sure? Like, do you have the right guy?" And I was like, "I need the way that you think," and that was definitely the right choice.
Cool. I'm glad to hear that.
Yep. But yeah, so taking a step back, there's agents are all the rage. We've talked about that on a couple episodes, and just the state of the industry. And so between the various contexts, health, purpose, meaning, all that stuff, I kind of want to open the conversation up a little, and I think Dylan, I'll start with you, because in our conversations, you mentioned before, you'd like to make a living doing this, but it's something that you're just super passionate about, and you find I'm imagining that you find meaning in the work that you do. And so, like, let's use that as a jumping off point. Like, imagine, today, tomorrow, 10 years from now, like, what do you see or feel or predict with respect to finding meaning, finding purpose, or just how you live on a day-to-day basis with respect to the changes that AI is bringing?
Yeah, well, okay, so it's sort of a strange place where I draw my inspiration from, so hang with me here. I'll kind of go through it. But, I was working for Zappos, which is owned by Amazon, and I was working on some pretty innovative stuff. It was like a software project that I really thought mattered, and the CEO there was like kind of really into systems thinking. So we went to go visit Jeffrey West and some of the people who were like, you can't think about a city or a company at a certain scale as a single entity. It breaks into these individual pieces. And then if you keep trying to keep control of everything under one frame, it gets more and more fragile, right? And around that time, the pandemic hit, and I started looking at what my girlfriend does for a living. And she's a magician here in Las Vegas, right? She gets on stage 3 times a week and like wows people, right? Cuts people in half, like pops out of elevators, like changes dresses. And she just thrives on that excitement of the meet and greet, of the like little girls in the audience, like being wowed. But she's so happy the whole time she's constructing so much work goes, like one magic trick, it's like, that looks like nothing. It's months and months and so much money. And it's so many days of like emails and hassles that you just don't think about. And there's marketing to it, but always in service of these moments of happiness, the work pays off. And then I thought to myself, gosh, like as much as I love this job, I'm not getting that payoff in the same way. And I just thought, why not try, they offered us a severance package, and like, why not try YouTube? Because I have friends that's the way I could maybe have that same moment where I'm like, I construct a video, I do the research, I put it all together, and then I get those comments and those reactions. And I'm learning along the way. I'm with the community along the way. And I think I just was inspired by the way she lives her physical life with real people. And if I could mimic that online. And I think that's kind of like what everybody's going to find their own poetry or whatever everybody wants. Sometimes it's completely pointless stuff. It's making a big macaroni castle or like the biggest card paper plane or something, you know. But it'll be what the future looks like because we won't have to exchange our money for time.
There you go.
I don't know if I'll
Olga,
totally agree with that.
I know go for it. All right.
Yeah,
So
go for it.
What you got?
what we've seen throughout time is that as technology develops, people and consumers just have higher and higher standards. And so maybe there'll be different work to be done, just like centuries ago, it was, hammers and nails, right? And blacksmiths. And now it's a lot of people are just sitting behind a computer, right? The work is different with, the Industrial Revolution and with technology and then the information age and, on and on. So the work is just very different, but there is still work to be done. A lot of jobs are safer, but they're different. And, 10 years ago, for example, I will take marketing, we had very different capabilities, right? And people and consumers had a certain level of expectation. Now we have, again, much, stronger capabilities and much more advanced capabilities, and consumers are beginning to have more and more expectations. So it's possible, I think it's possible that less work will be needed. But I still think that there's work that's going to be needed, and much of it will be fulfilling. People, I think, are way better off today in a lot of jobs than they were 100 years ago. And I say it's safer. So work will just be different. We talked about not needing to sit behind a computer, like, last time that we had this conversation, that maybe AR will become much more advanced, and so we can do the work and walk around, not be in this unnatural state, which is constantly sitting. So we'll see.
Yeah, and one subtle little note there too is just, I think it's sometimes just control. Like, it sounds weird, but I swear the same work that I'm doing can be 10 times more pleasurable if I just think I chose to do it versus like somebody saying like, you need to do it, here's your money. So it might be just as subtle as that, but we still work very hard.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, Olga? Yeah, I'm wondering if you think that the general trend is that because I think that what you're postulating is there's always going to be work, but the things are changing, and so is the general change that there's the work we do is going to be less and less hooked to what I might call like our basic survival needs? Is that kind of the trend you would see?
Possibly. But I think, when we look at countries that are less developed, it's completely different, right? And I think it's easy because we live in a rich country to think that this is how it is for the rest of the world, when in reality, it's not. And maybe in US, it'll be less necessary, and quality of living is, standard of living is just going up and up and up. And that is actually all across the world. But it's still there. I think there's still going to need to be some kind of a monetary exchange. Maybe just not as much.
That checks out. So I jotted down a couple notes as I'm listening. So Dylan, one thing that you brought up is choices that you've made around payoff. Like you made a choice to switch from a career to one that's just like, man, that lifestyle that comes with this career, this work, is different. So there's that emotional, like that connection, that payoff. And then Olga, you're talking about like inflated expectations, which is true. Like one of the principles of modern economic theory is human demand is infinite. Over a long enough timeline, people will just always want more. Quality of life goes up, so you want more. Consumption generally goes up. And then I think another point that was brought up is choice. That like if you choose it, if it's something that you either feel like you chose or it feels more voluntary, it might be more aligned to kind of your core constitution. And then of course even the nature of work changes, right? I think kind of that's one of the points is if you're doing backbreaking labor that's menial and tedious, that's not necessarily as engaging, that's going to feel a little bit different, and that's going to figure into quality of life. So I just wanted to like share those notes that I jotted down. Who wants to any counterpoints or follow-ups?
I think when you
I found some of the backbreaking labor I've done to be very rewarding, actually. I just want to
Yeah.
interject that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair.
That's a little, I think there's like a red flag that goes up of like, hey, sometimes, that level of effort, there's actually an opposite side to it. I mean, the human
it's
brain seems
choice.
to work by contrast. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Yes, I agree
That's
with
the
you.
difference.
Not that somebody's
right?
ordering you to
that's
do
the
it.
big, exactly. That's
Yes,
the big
I-
difference. You don't
100%.
need to wake up at 5 a.m. and, work 12 hours, etc. for that kind of labor. You can stop and then you can do whatever else you want to do. So it's a choice. I think in some ways, as work develops, right, we can, even right now, I can choose to have a lower quality of life that 100 years ago or, 500 years ago, this is how kings would live. So I can make that choice even today, but I choose not to because I want things and there's different things that I want.
Right.
Olga, too, it's so before we got on, I know you have a child in the other room, and she was like kind of screaming because she has a new nanny and all these things. And I was thinking, like, I think child rearing is like the perfect example of people who, if you studies have shown, like, if you text people while they're parenting at random times and say, "How do you feel?" they often aren't feeling great. They're tired. They're overworked. But they're also extremely satisfied when they think back to the purpose in their life and where they put their effort.
Exactly.
And it's just this strange, I think it might come down to something like hormones. I've heard dopamine is like a pre-award chemical, and then something like oxytocin might be afterwards. And you have to remember, like, some of the best feeling you're going to get from a vacation happens before you go on the vacation, thinking about it, your child growing up. And, the body isn't straightforward about opportunity and reward.
And it's
It seems
purpose,
like,
right?
didn't Kahneman have that framing, the experiencing self and the remembering self? Am I getting that
It
right?
came from some book
Yeah.
I read. I just couldn't remember.
Yeah. But like when you're actually in the middle of something, that's a certain kind of self. When you think back on it, that's
Yeah.
still a
Something
certain
else,
kind
yeah.
of experience. It's a different kind, right?
Yeah, and I think it shows that
Yeah.
Olga's looking for the kind of big purpose win in life. Like, you're
It's
going to
purpose.
think back and be like, oh, I raised a great child, and even all
Right.
that work was worth it. And little moments that are just probably 20 seconds will just fill you with joy
It's
for
more-
the
it's more
hours
than
and hours
20
you put into
seconds.
raising.
But yes, there's
him or
a
her.
lot of ups and downs, right?
Yeah.
For-
Those,
for
well, of course, yeah.
sure.
Like all those
Yeah.
little moments, the first words or the
Right,
the little
right.
mannerism that she picked up or he picked up from you. Like, yeah.
And happiness, and I think does come
Yeah.
from
No,
purpose.
I was thinking.
Viktor Frankl. I don't know if anyone of you have, but he talks a lot about how you cannot pursue
God.
happiness.
Yeah, man's search
Yeah.
for meaning. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Not in and of itself. Happiness is a byproduct when you find purpose, and that purpose can be found in very different things. Even money, right? Like, you can be
I just want to say
motivated
that
by
book
that.
should be like required reading.
Yes, agree. It's something that I try to read like every year just to remind myself.
It's so good.
It's really good. Yeah, it's really
I
good.
know.
And money
Yep.
is a perfectly fine purpose, perfectly fine motivator, right? So that's it's okay. Like, it's okay to want those things and be happy by money, so long as you're not like abusing people or taking advantage of people or anything like that.
Right. Let me test this as a possible insight, because as I've been listening to this section of the conversation, I'm struggling a little bit with this idea of choice, because I totally, like, I don't want somebody to control me, so I do want choice, but I also know that there is a certain kind of, it's like there's some way that not having a choice in certain moments actually contributes to purpose. I feel like. I'm not sure if I can actually provide a concrete example right now, but I can just tell you, like, in the situation that I'm in the, I'm basically out in the middle of the woods, living off grid. Like, there are, I mean, I could choose, if my property is flooding, to not do anything and let it wreck my house. I mean, that technically is a choice, but like, if I want to have a house, I actually do not have a choice in that moment,
Right.
But there's something about being called in different ways in a challenging situation and responding that actually feels like it contributes to purpose. It also, to me, it contributes to resilience.
Well, maybe it's
like,
the fear
I
of
would
the
never want to be in a
unknown.
place where I could always choose everything. I actually think that would hurt my vitality. So I guess my question is, like, what kind of choice are we talking about? Because I think having every moment to moment choice is actually not a very vital way to live. There's a different kind of choice, I think.
Yeah,
I
I
hope
agree,
that
'cause
we're
then you get
pointing at.
bored.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
If you can choose anything at all times, you just get bored and then you lose that purpose. So completely agree.
Right.
Right.
I would also
So
argue
there's-
that maybe you also get scared. I just did an interview with like a big a financial guy, and he takes calls or whatever from his audience, and people who have bad jobs, he said, were kind of happier than people who were unsure where their next paycheck was going to come from, even if on average it paid off better. So it's the unknown of like not knowing where my next meal is going to come from, how I'm going to pay my bill, that actually rips people up more than a low wage job at McDonald's in a weird way. So yeah, there's something about that too.
Yep. Yeah, so there's two phenomena that figure into this. So one is the problem of choice. So problem of choice is the idea that if you have too many options, you get analysis paralysis because you don't know which, like there's an opportunity cost. And so it's like, okay, well, if you have an infinite number of choices, one, you can't even contemplate all of those. Whereas if you have 2 or 3 choices, it's really easy. The cognitive load of saying, you know, there's three flavors of tomato sauce. Pick one. You've got basil, you've got garlic, and you've got pesto, right? Rather than 80 choices, you're like, I don't know which one it is. And so then the other one is constraints. And so I don't mean law of constraints, but I mean that constraints are actually required for creativity. When you have to, because if you can imagine any solution and there's no constraints, it's like, okay, well, if like here's an example. I want to get to Mars, so invent warp drive. Problem solved. There's no fun in that. So, but then what are the constraints? The constraints are, you know, the laws of physics, the technology that you have access to today, the money that you have. And so constraints actually increase creativity and increase fun, right? The harder it is, the more constraints. Like people that play Dark Souls and stuff, the constraints are you get hit once, you die. And people have fun doing that. I couldn't play that game. But point is that there are that any kind of game, whether it's the game of life, the game of money, the game of love, whatever, the challenge is in the constraints, and that also forces your brain to be more creative, and then you derive more meaning from that experience, and that's universally
you don't
true.
want God mode. You want an interesting game with good rules that keeps you engaged. I mean, that's what was that one guy's name? I can never pronounce it. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the guy that wrote Flow. We talk about these research studies where there was like I think the game was like a ring toss or something, and they're like, you toss this ring onto this pole, and you can stand as far away as you want, and the quite clear observation was nobody stands right next to the pole and just throws it on there, and nobody stands a mile away with no shot. People naturally stand at a distance where it's like challenging but not impossible. That's sort of our natural state of like where we feel engaged is where something is challenging but within our capabilities.
So David, is your body first living about constraints? Like, is that how you think about it?
That's so. Thanks for bringing that up. That's one thing. So we're always constrained by our bodies. There's a limit to what you can do. Like I was on a hike this morning, and it was starting to get hot, and I'm like, man, I've only been out here for 2 hours, and there are Army Rangers who could do this for like 8 days straight, and so they're like 100 times where I'm at. So they have a different set of constraints. Or NFL players who burn 15,000 calories a day on training days. Like their bodies are way different caliber than where I'm at. So I have to operate inside my constraints, which is I've got about 2 hours of hiking in me. I can do that every day. So all of my options in terms of what I can do, because I love nature, I love being outside, are constrained by that level of energy. And then, everyone has a social battery too. So it's like your social battery determines how much time you can engage with other people, the kinds of social things that you can do. So part of body first living or radical alignment is knowing and honoring that, and rather than either fighting against it or trying to fit yourself into some other mold. So it's all part of it. I hope that makes sense.
So the constraint is the body, or it's a mental choice that you're saying?
Both, all of the above. It's the situation of where you're at in life, where you're physically at. It's the constraint of your biological constraints. It can be social constraints, but really part of it is about getting rid of the social constraints. So, for instance, one of the social constraints is you have to be at work at 7 a.m. or you have to drop your kids off at school at 7:30 a.m. or those arbitrarily enforced social constraints that are not necessarily aligned with our creature needs. Like you have to work at a desk for 8 hours a day. That's an arbitrary constraint that I think everyone on this call has gotten rid of. We might work that long, but it would be out of choice. Going back to that idea of choice.
It's interesting when you talk about, constraints in terms of like the blank paper problem, that stifles creativity, because this is an issue that I constantly see coming up with people using AI and They're always asking me, how do I use AI? What can I do? Like, right? Because there's many, many things you can do, but people just don't know where to start. And so it's this blank paper problem that I think hinders a lot of people in adapting AI in very useful ways.
Oh yeah.
So you start by just telling them something simple, like what can you start with by using it for email, or start by using it for
tell them. I usually
writing
say
or something, and then get them used to it.
Yeah, I usually would say, well, if you were going to Google something, just ask ChatGPT or ask Perplexity or Copilot. They have access to the internet. So that's the first thing that I would say is replace it with Google. And then the next thing is just try anything. You have a question, even if it's in your head that you think Google couldn't answer, well, ask it. You want to write something, you want to write an email, you want to write a birthday card, try it, right? And then as you begin to explore more and more, you will come up with different ways, right? You want a recipe for something, try it, ask it. May not say it's great, but you can kind of gauge for yourself those ingredients.
I think I just had an insight. I want to test this out. So I'm actually thinking of this as like an interesting life hack where if I'm stuck in something, one of the things I would ask myself is there a constraint missing that I need that's keeping me from setting, a frame that allows me to move? Which I don't know if that necessarily would happen all that often, but it has happened to me. I've definitely been in a place where I had too much choice, or I was paralyzed by not having some kind of framework around me to push against. Yeah.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
So
right?
one of the questions,
that's true.
Necessity, absolutely. One of the questions that my wife asks me all the time is, what are you trying to optimize for? And because at any given moment, whether it's a particular day or a week or a project, there is some number you're trying to move or some result you're trying to get. And so then that can speak to what constraints you need or that you have. Because then it's like, okay, well, if I'm trying to maximize health today, then okay, well, that rules out a few things, like I'm not going to go drinking, right? Or I'm not going to go partying. Or if I need social, like then I might make a different choice. I'm trying to optimize for getting my social needs met at any given moment. But on this train of thought, thinking about constraints and the problem of choice, I'm wondering, what do you guys think? I want to pitch this to the crew. So with AI, like obviously, I think that there's probably some broad agreement that certain types of jobs are probably going away. So those choices are going to be removed in the same way that telephone operators and horse and buggy drivers, those jobs went away.
As a paying option, right? Like you could still do it, but you're not getting paid you're not going to create value with doing that.
As a vocation, as a paid vocation, as a general option. So, but will we create more options? Probably. But now the question is, will AI create too many options for people or too few options? Like will the constraints of the future economy, a year from now, 5 years from now, will there be too many constraints or too few? I guess is probably a better way of asking it.
Wow.
And I have no idea if there is an answer, and maybe that's even the wrong question.
Yeah, I read a piece. It came through my Medium a couple days ago that said like this guy was offering the contrarian view that there will be way more jobs. Like money will be a thing, and AI will give us such an abundance of jobs for humans because we're a certain source of data that like it's going to want to know about, and it'll always want to pay us for that, or people will always have things they'll want to know about humans because we wrote a lot of history and we're the creators of them. So I was thinking to myself, like, it could be, but it still feels to me like the money goes away and the jobs drop off.
I mean, I think I kind of agree
I like that
with
as a possibility. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, just thinking about like historically, we now have more choice today than ever before. We go into a supermarket and it's aisles and aisles and aisles filled of different sauces, right? Which we didn't have in the past. So as technology advances, as humanity advances, there are more choices. Before you had only one video platform. Now you have 10 video platforms, right? So it expands.
I'm not
you
sure
guys
if
are talking. You guys are talking about the Malcolm Gladwell book, right? So I just had to ChatGPT it. I'm like, why do people keep bringing up spaghetti sauce and choice? And then ChatGPT is like, there's a book written by, because I was like, I swear I've heard that before too, but I was like, what am I missing here? It's like such an AI solution to a problem, but
there you go.
Okay.
I
Anyway,
went.
sorry.
I went to see. I went to see the 45th anniversary of Alien with Sigourney Weaver, and I was in the front row by myself because it was the middle of the day, and I was asking ChatGPT about movie trivia the entire time. Like, how did they make this scene? Like, did they do that sound on purpose? And yeah, so no, that it's totally there. But yeah, so we're referring to as Malcolm Gladwell, and I actually learned about it from another. Was it Outlier? Not Outliers. Maybe Freakonomics. I think they talk about it in Freakonomics
Well,
too.
according to the ChatGPT reply, a guy named Howard Moskowitz is who Malcolm Gladwell was referencing for the choice thing. He just threw the spaghetti sauce example out.
There was another guy too, Barry Schwartz, I think his name was. I seem to recall seeing a TED talk from him where he talked about more than whatever. There's like a magic number. It was like 6 choices. Any more than
6.
that, and like
That's
the utility of having more choices, and that went down. Is it 6? Yeah,
It's 6.
It's like the magic number. Yep.
Yeah.
So go ahead,
on the topic of number of choices, because this is actually something that has been talked about with like AI art and AI music, and of course like movies coming up soon, is one thing that people are worried about is like, oh hey, if there's a million new TV shows produced every year, we're going to have this splintering of society, and we're not going to have any movies or TV shows in common. And that's already true.
Yeah, we have that now.
Apple TV has their own, Netflix, Amazon. Right, yeah, we
well,
already have that
news
now.
is long gone, right? Like news people
Right.
are in their own total universe, yeah.
Yep. And music too. Like there's, you get on Spotify and there's like 8 billion tracks, and so it's like I have all these niches that I engage in that nobody else except for like, 3 other people have the exact, because like you get the year-end report, it's like, oh, you're the biggest fan of this band over here. You listen to 99.8% of the listens that this band gets, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, cool, I'm a super fan. But so we're getting this atomization of society, and that's going to continue. Like, you can infinitely scroll AI art. You're going to be able to infinitely scroll AI music and AI movies. So I think Olga's right that at least in some respects, choice just keeps going up like exponentially.
Yes.
Now, will it keep going up for lifestyles, for career opportunities, other products to consume or services to consume? I'm curious what you guys think about any of those particular food groups.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts too on just like, is that good or not? Because I basically have both worldviews where like more choice means more freedom for people to express themselves. They're not as disenfranchised, and there's all these places that would never have popped up with some sort of central kind of media or cultural control. But on the other hand, it also seems like it might be easier to keep peace and have less war, and maybe just communicate if we all sort of have a shared value system and language and things like that too. So yeah, I don't know. I can kind of argue both of them. I don't know if I have a strong opinion yet.
Trying to take a crack at a slightly deeper cut.
Yeah.
Which I think speaks to the essence of like what I'm trying to do out in the woods too. Like I part of like, I would say the central thesis of what I've been exploring out there is much like the deep evolutionary desire for our bodies to have salt, sugar, and fat. Like for most of our evolutionary history, that was good, and so we just want it. But now in modern times, that deep evolutionary drive has crested, and it actually, like, to just keep doing that makes you less healthy, right? And so my thesis out there is that there's a similar basic evolutionary programming we have to seek what I might call comfort and convenience. Because for however many thousands of years, seeking that almost all the time was like the right decision. So it's like deeply programmed into us. But I personally believe that we've crested. Like we have enough comfort and convenience so that we're not like physically threatened. And now we're getting too much. Most people get too much. And actually, if you just look at the amount of comfort, do like a graph and like, here's the amount of comfort and convenience, here's your vitality, or I think it'd be reversed. So here's comfort and convenience, and this is vertical is vitality. At some point, you crest over. Like, any more comfort and you actually become less vital, right? And that edge, that's exactly what I'm doing out there in the woods, living off grid. It's like, where is the peak? Because I think I crossed it 3 years ago. Like I was on the other side 3 years ago, and I backtracked, right? And so to me, the deeper cut isn't like, I would say it's obvious we're going to have, like, as things go well, we're going to have more choice. But the thing that concerns me is that we have, I just pointed to 2 of them. One is salt, sugar, and fat. Another one is comfort, convenience. But there's all these like ways that we're deeply biologically programmed that are very powerful forces that are easy to ignore and to be shaped by. And the more we take off the constraint of like that we're limited by our environment. So that kind of, if I only have certain choices, that maps well to the biological constraints that we've had for 100,000 years or whatever. But the more those are removed, the more I think we're going to have to self-monitor and be aware of our own biological proclivities to stay healthy, right?
Right.
And so it's like, to me, it's like it's almost like it's irrelevant if we're getting more choice or not. What is relevant is, are we tracking how we're programmed and what we need to do if we're going to lift that as a like a universal or a physical world constraint? Are we going to be able to consciously apply the right amount of limitation to ourselves to stay in what I would call like our healthy range of operating,
Right.
Like until we like, it's really, this is to me this simple. Until and unless people choose to leave human bodies, we have a certain kind of like biological and genetic programming and limitations that if we don't stay within those ranges, we're not healthy. And we can debate what the ranges are, but to say that we don't have any is bananas, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm way more concerned about that, because that when I see more and more choice happening, it's like, that's fine that we have more choice, but we need to be conscious about how those choices are expressed in people's day-to-day lives and moment-to-moment actual choices.
Or balance.
You're going to sit around just like a million choices. What is the meaning of life? We're never going to be able to ground ourselves that way as biologically evolved humans,
Yeah. Too much of a good thing is never good.
Right? Like we have,
Right.
Yeah, no, the dose makes the poison.
Right.
And so it's like you can have an infinite amount of junk food and porn and video games, and you can live completely saturated with dopamine, and you'll end up diabetic and obese and addicted and all those bad things. And you're right.
But that wasn't possible until
Right.
how many hundred years you have to go back to go like almost all that what you just said is not possible. Right.
Unless you were super wealthy, right?
Right,
Unless you
exactly.
lived like a king. And,
Right.
But so you're right. Like we are already. So I really like this insight. I really appreciate this. I want to unpack this for just a second. We already are having to learn to titrate abundance. We have a hyperabundance of calories. We have a hyperabundance of digital distractions. That's not going
Hyperabundance
to
of
change.
Comfort. Yeah.
Right,
Hyperabundance of
right.
choice. Yeah. There's a lot of these things.
And you're right. Like, and one thing that I've been doing is, one of the rules that I've set for myself is, as long as the weather is good and unless I'm sick, like I go hiking every day, regardless of how much sleep that I got. My reasoning is my body evolved to do that. Because, it's like if the fields need, if you're hungry, you go hunting or you go fishing. Doesn't matter how tired you are. If the field needs plowing, if there's a storm coming, like you get up and you go do it. And even so, yesterday I was dog tired, and I don't know why, but I was dog tired. And even though I was like sleepy, my body was able to go on a 2-hour hike, no problem. And I'm like, what is this disconnect? Like my body's perfectly fine.
I have
I'm
so
sleepy.
felt that. Yeah. I relate to that big time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that's another example, like everything that we're talking about here, like titrating what you give your body and how you choose to live. That's all what I mean by like body first living and radical alignment, is aligning to like that upper and lower bound, because there's an optimal range for food, exercise, time in nature, time with other people. There's got to be some, and it's going to vary from person to person over the course of your life. But those are kind of some of the ideas that I'm talking about, whether it's stimulation, meaning, purpose, whatever, right? What do you guys think about all those ideas?
Yeah, it's balance.
I have some. I could take a
you
pass
need
at
that.
it.
Yeah, balance. Olga, you've been trying to chime in. Go for it.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, I think again, it's pretty simple. Like too much of anything is not good, and part of our evolution is going to be more and more self-control. And I think as AGI comes about and solves a lot of those problems, with those choices that we're going to have, which is more and more, then we need to exercise more self-control and be balanced, right?
Ooh, can I disagree? I want to disagree.
Go for it.
Go for it.
It's not disagree. It's actually it's more like a yes and. So I think that's right, that there needs to be some kind of self-governing, but I think it's a mistake to do that with willpower. I think it should be done by design. So Dylan and I were talking about this before you got on the call, Dave. But like David Allen, the famous Getting Things Done guy, talks about this idea of like, having the smart part of your brain trick the dumb part of your brain into doing the right thing. And that framing feels so much more durable than doing something more like willpower, right? And so, like, just as an example from my own life, like I'm living in the woods. I use firewood. I carry my own water. So if it's 10 o'clock at night and I get back and it's 20 degrees and it's cold, in that moment, I can't be like, I'm going to go to my condo or no, I'm going to sell my land and buy a condo in Chicago or whatever, right? Like that's not really, I mean, it is a choice, but it would be a particularly dumb choice in that moment. The only real choice I have because of the way I've designed it is I got to go out and haul in wood and build a fire, right? And that's because I constructed a frame in my life that meant that moment to moment, those limitations are designed in, but they're designed in such a way that it creates a certain kind of stress that actually produces wellness for me. So another example from my life is when I tell people this, it kind of sounds crazy, but it's like, it's not crazy, which is I've been in Maine for 3 years now. I shower outdoors 12 months of the year, which means there are days when it's 10, 15 degrees outside and I'm out there with 50 or 60 degree water showering. Now I'm not out there for a half hour, right? It's a Navy shower. But when I'm doing it, like when I'm actually taking the shower, I'm not suffering, right? Like I feel the sensation of the cold, but I'm not suffering. And it's entirely because I've put myself in a situation where my body has adapted to where that feels like in a normal and healthy range. Or if it's anywhere between, say, 40 degrees and 85 degrees, I can be in a t-shirt and pants and be comfortable. But it's
that's
because
design, right?
I don't have any temperature stability in my life, right? Because I designed my life to not have temperature stability. My body has responded to that environmental design by becoming more vital and becoming more flexible. And so I really think, I feel so passionate about this, that using the smart part of your brain to trick the dumb part of your brain that wants all the salt, sugar, and fat, comfort, and choice that it wants into not having those things.
Right.
Right.
And that itself is willpower.
What I aim for now is vitality. What's that?
The design
yes,
itself
it's by design, not by willpower. Correct.
But you had to exercise willpower in order to create that design to begin with. It wasn't just you had to do it.
I agree with you. No, I agree with you, but it was exercising willpower at that level is a much more efficient way to do it, I guess. More durable. I think that was the word I used earlier.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to have to make a choice via willpower in the moment over and over again. That is not like the optimal way to. If I'm optimizing for willpower, I want to make it at a high level by systems design. And then when I'm in the weeds, I don't actually have a choice. Like in a day-to-day basis, I actually shouldn't. What is it called? Decision fatigue? That's totally a thing, right?
Decision fatigue.
So make the right few decisions that set up your life to give you the optimal amount of things that you as a human being are designed for, which is not too much choice, which is not too much comfort, right? Not too much salt, sugar, and fat. Yeah.
Dylan looks very skeptical.
No, that's my just like
or thinking.
No, I'm actually couldn't be like maybe I was just quiet because I just totally agree. I think you use your willpower, you set up your environment, and even though in our modern world I see a handful of things that seem too big to tackle, like by an individual, maybe pollution in the environment or the PFAS that show up in our synthetic materials and things. Realistically, most people have a huge amount to gain by sleeping correctly. I mean, artificial light, it sucks to deal with, but you could start turning off your light similar to the time the sun went down and start waking up when the sun comes up if you don't have a job that requires you to do things. With food, some of the big choice, instead of asking how many, all these weird protein ratios that people want, but if you just said, is it a whole food? Did it grow? And are you kind of limiting your meat consumption to probably what our ancestors had, which seems like it wasn't as much as we consume today. And I think the microbiome, you guys kind of looked into that, how we have so many bacteria that live in our stomach and throughout our body that aren't even our DNA. And they're getting wiped out by some of these medications that kill them. And then we don't properly put them back in. It's kind of complicated, but it's kind of simple if you took, I'd say maybe a dozen really important things and structure your life around them and then just change that environment and let it roll. I think a lot of people could have huge gains in happiness.
Yeah.
Do you think you need money to do that?
One concept is
what you're talking about.
You need a certain. I think you need a certain level
right?
of privilege.
A level of privilege, a level of money.
That's a serious problem. Like people in India. Yeah, when my girlfriend did Magicians Without Borders, we went to some of the poorest areas of India, and there was knowledge gaps in some places, and there was just simply not enough money to have that kind of freedom or that kind of control. Like to get fresh fruit and vegetables is not an option everybody has. But if you can get to that point, it isn't infinitely, like it's not like that you have to be a millionaire and do all these like TRT therapies and stuff to be healthy. So
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I built my house for it was between $13,000 and $15,000. But my current living situation was like $13,000 to $15,000, which probably sounds bananas, but I've been there 3 years now.
right.
So, but I mean, to me, the big privilege is being in this country. I definitely feel privileged to be here, like to be in a place where I have access to the tools to be able to choose the life that I want. But actually living it is not that expensive, honestly. Like there's not that much like financial privilege I need to be able to execute it.
Well, I think going back to something that Olga mentioned is that, like, you know, standard of living is going up globally and will continue to go up with the aid of technology. So I think that you know, and as I think everyone kind of understands and agrees, the tide in the long run, the tide of technology raises everyone's standard of living. Your basic accessibility today was outside of what you could afford, you know, 100 years ago, 500 years ago. And so I think that as technology reaches maybe not a point of saturation, but or at least more broad penetration, more people will have the options and the privilege to make these choices. So one question that I have, or one I guess problem that I foresee, is many people will not have the time or energy or willpower or whatever, the recognizance to deliberately make the decisions that we're making, that we're discussing here. Some people are just going to get sucked into the social media, you know, gray matter meat grinder and just end up addicted. Like, one thing that I've noticed as my channel has gotten bigger is there are people who hate me that just watch my content all day, and I'm like, why do you watch my channel if it makes you mad? But it's because the algorithm is feeding it to them, and I'm like, you are more than welcome to block my channel. Like, if I make you mad, that is not why I'm here. But the algorithm,
you're so likable. Who could possibly hate watching?
I am very opinionated, so I understand. Right. So I understand if I rub some people the wrong way, but that's not why I'm doing it. And so I'm just like, it's the algorithm is this is attributing malice where maybe there isn't any, but the algorithm is choosing to hurt people for engagement, and I'm like, I don't like that. So from a larger systemic perspective, maybe government policy or corporate responsibility, you know, civic responsibility, as the number of options goes up, all the companies are going to be trying to optimize for something. You know, I agree with Olga. Money is not going anywhere. Our relationship to money might change. The way that we get it and exchange it might change. The reasons, but money's not going anywhere. And so corporations are always going to want more money, I think. And with that problem of choice, like, how do we, and there's no, I don't think there's any option, and this is pure speculation, but like, how do we address that and make sure that it's not just pure exploitation from here on out, like just gaming the system to get as much attention as you can?
I don't know, man. Like, all this money that's going into these companies, Microsoft and Google, they're not going to just be like, oh, let's like do the altruistic thing and like turn this over to a world government. I mean, maybe if dangers, like, I guess the CEO of Anthropic said basically, like, when you get to demonstrate how powerful some of these models are, that they can create biological weapons and stuff, maybe people will just be so scared that we can like force it away from, I guess, certain companies and into more of a public good system. But
it has
I don't
to
know.
come
You guys might have better ideas than me, because there's nothing.
Yeah. Like, if you look at
Yeah,
all the corporate and, you know, environmental and social responsibility movement, that came from people. That wasn't companies trying to, you know, just do good. You know, when I worked in finance and we had different financial instruments, and there was like due diligence questionnaires that needed to be answered about these financial instruments. One of them was always, what is your environmental and social policy? And that is like very new compared to, you know, what it was maybe even like 50 years ago. So that came from people from society directly. And I think that's the same thing is probably going to happen going forward as well.
So
Yeah, I mean,
Dave,
unless somebody has like a kind of a better argument for why, it seems to me like the way it would go is just that the social media companies do use AI, and like you got like gray matter like all day long just getting stimulated, and I guess some kind of outcome like the movie Idiocracy, where we just kind of lose a lot of ability to critical think and stuff. Might see, it seems to me like it might be the easiest path, and the one that I tend to think people go down unless they have wake up moments or they're motivated by some sort of health scare or something. So I don't know, maybe there's ways we can like create media that warns people of that ahead of time.
So Dylan, I remember I think you said like it's not the safety alignment problem, it's the incentive alignment problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and,
I think I see everything as incentives.
Yeah, and well, because companies are incentivized to make money. People had Chad, to your point, like on a biological level, we're incentivized to pursue high quality protein, fat, salt, comfort, those sorts of things. Now I'm thinking about the affordances, and so that this is the constraints and the forcing function. So like what you were talking about, like you don't have central heat, you have a wood burning stove. So that's a forcing function that you have structurally changed in your life. So that if you want heat, you get wood, and so that creates a whole bunch of other behaviors. Now I'm thinking like, because I've looked at co-housing communities and co-living communities and communes, and those come with different affordances, different structural affordances that force people to socialize more. And so I'm wondering if just part of the solution is where and how we live. So like Chad, like you wanted to talk about homesteading, so if you want to unpack that a little bit more, if there's any other parts, like the way that you have physically chosen to live, how that reshapes your life, and then like if you want to live with an extended family home or in a eco village or whatever, I'm wondering if that could be part of a more comprehensive solution or set of choices that we can say, hey, rather than getting sucked into the YouTube, Reddit, VR porn rabbit hole of dopamine, the black hole of dopamine, what if you choose to live somewhere that just has more or different affordances, different forcing functions?
Yeah, so I'll set a brief context, a couple pieces of brief context, and then talk about that. So the first one is like, I'm not an expert, right? This is a personal experiment that I've been on for 3 years, but I do have 3 years under my belt to talk about. The second one is just talking about the shift. Like I went from a really comfortable condominium situation where I had all of what we would call like the modern affordances, covered parking, dishwasher, all my utilities piped in, to not that, to where like the big ones would be my heat situation, shelter, water, and like just sort of like gray water and waste. Those all became off-grid type situations, right? And so I would say the essence of what feels valuable to me about that, besides the fact that it does create these forcing functions you're talking about that end up producing, it's just clear to me subjectively that I have better vitality. The simple fact that I can be in a t-shirt in 40-degree weather and not have the subjective experience of feeling cold, like very few people in our culture have that, and it's not because their body's not capable of it. They just don't put themselves through the temperature range, right? But I think beyond that, it's really just, shit, I lost my train of thought. I hate when that happens.
No worries.
You're talking about affordances.
Yeah, or forcing functions.
Yeah, it's got to come back, but it's gone right now, so we should probably move on.
worries.
I don't want to get us stuck,
Oh, yeah.
Would it be lame if we talk about love?
Sure. I mean, not lame, but go for it.
Like, I mean, like, I don't know. It's not like anything I really ever talk about on my channel or anything, but it's just, I was thinking about how we're kind of wired for pair bonding and for love at sometimes, and how sometimes I can actually step so far away from what makes me happy that I'm just connected to someone else. Like if they're happy, I can be happy even for no reason, or if they're sad, I can be sad. And if you, I guess, have one of these forced kind of communal things, I could imagine that being like a really powerful way, because everybody might be getting their own Instagram feed and social media, and they might like start being very politically different when they're online, but they'll end up gelling together in a way that would be really powerful, maybe more like a family unit. And yeah, it just seems like that could be one of the better solutions. Like real, like doesn't matter, just down to the what's Dunbar's number, 150, I think, like something where like where you have a reasonable amount of people that you interact with, like for a good 50% of the day, 30% of the day, something that's like significant enough that it can kind of overpower all these kind of social media signals, and it can be something that is physically embodied and connected in a way that could keep us very happy.
And you just reminded me what I was going to say, which is that living the way I am, it forces me for at least a portion of my day to be highly present. And if I call back to the idea of cutting down a tree, I have cut down trees that could have blasted my house if I didn't do it right. And so that whole process, I am exquisitely present because there is something on the line, you know? And so there's so many moments in my day when I'm out there that I have to be much more present. I have to be present to the weather, the temperature, the humidity, anything I'm doing that might be dangerous to actually destroy my environment. And that, to me, I think maybe the right term would be like it acts as a bulwark against all this other things that we're concerned about, like against the speed of social media and the speed of change. I have this sort of ground that I operate in that feels very close to just the way a human body exists in the physical universe. And by exposing myself to that for enough time every day, it like helps to not insulate, but like ground me so I don't get knocked off center quite so easily with the pace of change and things like you can't tell which the truth in news anymore or things like that. It's like if I'm out there hauling water, like all that's true is just I feel the weight of the water and I know how far I have to walk. It's like it's so grounding in like base reality, right? In the base reality of my human experience. And I think that would, my personal experience suggests that most people would benefit from having more of that in their lives. I mean, I don't know how to do it. Like I did it by doing this crazy thing where I moved into the woods, but I find myself wishing that more people had these grounding. Yeah, I guess that would do it too. But like have these grounding functions, have these things that like get you in the dirt as a human. Yeah, that feels like it's really like a great protection against some of the things we're talking about that are concerns.
Yeah, I haven't turned on my TV.
Okay, maybe you could tell us
in in the first year or so after I had a kid, I did not have a chance to turn on my TV at all. Like I could not think about my phone. I couldn't think about social media. Like I have a kid that is crying that needs to be fed, right? Like this is where I'm present. You know, the fact like watching TV, it was a privilege. It wasn't like something that I just got to do all day long. No, like that was like a real thing. I had to like pay somebody so that I could go and do that. And there's love, right? So that kind of ties in with Dylan. What you were talking about is the necessity of love, and love can come in many different forms. It can be for a partner, it can be for a family, but it does keep you grounded, and you end up doing things that are way more important, I think, than just scrolling through your feed.
Yeah. So I have a story, just brief story, and so co-living, I bring it up because during the pandemic, I ended up having 6 people living at my house. It was just a few friends moved in. My now wife wanted to come live with us, and so there are 6 people living under one roof. And I remember, to Dylan, your point about like it doesn't even have to be the good stuff. So one day, one of the women that lived with us, she went to interview to be a nanny at a wealthy family's home. And the experience was really unsettling just because of how dysfunctional the family was. And so she gets home from this interview and she's sitting in the middle of the living room floor and just like trying to process just how dysfunctional this family was. And one by one, we all just kind of accumulated around her to help her process that experience. And we just sat with her and was just like, she's like, this happened. Is that okay? And I'm like, no, that sounds really weird. And then someone else would chime in, and like that was one of the most meaningful experiences I've had in the last 5 years. And it was not necessarily a positive experience, but it was of a intentional community. It was a impromptu tribe that we had formed. And it was so I just wanted to reinforce that idea that when you have that connection, that immediate connection with people, it does not necessarily have to always be positive. Now, a couple of weeks before that, we had like Christmas, where everyone was having Christmas together, and we decorated a nice table and set up a little snow village, and that was also great. And then we'd have bonfires, but still interesting. It just clicked in my head because one of the most memorable and meaningful experiences was not necessarily a positive one. So I just wanted to share that story.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the idea that something happens to us and it's sort of unknown or we don't know how to feel about it, and then we look for people around us to help us ground that idea. Like, was that, imagine if you all sat down and said, no, that's normal. Like, that's how life works nowadays. And then she was more messed up, like you had to sit there and give her a dose of reality because she didn't get it from that situation. So it's like we all need these grounding things, and we probably shouldn't be turning to social media that just wants to maybe feed us a custom movie about something, and then we get more lost in who we are.
Yeah.
Or
even like hop on. Yeah. You turn to Reddit or you turn to the chat bot or whatever. Like, we co-regulate with each other, right? Like, your nervous system is attuned to regulate with other humans. So like, if everyone's excited, you get excited too. If there's something serious going on, everyone tunes into that energy as well.
Amen.
Yeah, in fact, I just read a book about memory, and there was a study in the book where they had a group of 6 people experience an event, and they let everybody just go after and process on a sheet of paper what they experienced, and then they brought them back in 3 months later to see how much they remembered of it and what details they remembered. But another group of 6 people also had the exact same event. It was like actors and stuff like that, and then they got together as a group and wrote down one sheet of paper of what they remembered, and then 3 months later were referenced. And the point is that 3 months later, the shared experience was shared by all of the people who co-wrote the memory right after versus everyone else who had their own individual take on it. And in some cases it's good because we want people to have diversity, and in some cases it's good because we want people to have unity. So, but just remember, like, your vision of the past was tainted by who you processed it with.
Yeah. No, I guess that's fair, because that was my perception of that particular event, and I don't know what anyone else's perception was, but it seemed very meaningful.
Yeah. I think it might be good to throw in here too, since we're given the topic of like relationship, that I spent 7 years living in a co-housing community, and I could highly recommend that as an awesome external structure to promote the kind of connection that we're talking about. It had this beautiful balance of, like, when I was in my condo unit, it was my own space, so I had my sense of agency. But right outside my door was like this, there was no requirement, but it was like this sort of energetic calling to be with people right outside my door. And once I left out to go outside of my immediate space, that was a we space. And so I had a really beautiful combination of agency and communion that was set up because of the structure. The surrounding structure made it easy to have a good, healthy amount of those things. If I was to wish one thing on terms of our modern housing situation and change that for the better, it would be something like some design like co-housing, that by design, it actually promoted this healthy balance of agency and communion.
There you
I
go.
think that
I
could
feel like
be
when you're living
dangerous.
in your own, like, isolated house in the suburbs, you don't have the communion part. Really? Oh, tell me more.
Well, because so I was born in the Soviet Union, right? And there, like, communal living was forced upon people. You literally lived in these buildings where you shared a kitchen and you shared a bathroom, and it was not a fun experience for most people. And I guess this kind of comes back to choice, is the fact that they didn't choose this, right? It was just kind of what ended up happening.
Right.
But so. Yeah. Being in a situation where, like, society is forcing this upon you, I don't think that's good. I think that's very dangerous. Being in a situation where it's an option for people, so you can live in this way, right? Or and I guess, you do when you're, like, in college, right? And you're in dorm rooms and frat houses and, sorority houses. But maybe, having it, I don't know, maybe more socially acceptable, or just an option in housing, which is not maybe as as available, like, in the suburbs, and that actually is by design as well, is these large homes in the suburbs, which make it only accessible to, like, people with money. So that part I think is good.
Right.
Having it as a force, like, upon you, I think is very bad, and history has shown so.
Yeah, well, to be clear, I certainly wasn't saying it should be forced on anybody. And also sounds like what you experienced was you didn't have a choice. So and it was really heavy on the communion part. Like, you were being forced to be with other people, right?
So not me personally. We lived in an apartment, but people were for it wasn't me for personally, but it was like people I knew and friends I had, like, that was kind of what was forced.
you got to hear what it was like for them, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
So just to be clear about co-housing, like there was plenty of agency in that model. That I'm not advocating for we force everybody together and force them to be together. I'm actually advocating for both are available. You have a place, you have a by design, you have the ability to express agency and you have the ability to express communion. And there's some way that the facility, the structure allows those to work together, because they're kind of a polarity, right? Like those are opposite needs that humans have. And so if we can set up a structure that allows both ends of that polarity to be met in a healthy way, I just think it's better.
Well, we need
And
to
David,
regulate
does your like
zoning
radical alignment
for
for body first living? Oh,
I think that's one of the big
zoning
things.
is the
it's
issue.
Actually like
here.
The common problem is you can't get bank loan. You cannot get a bank loan to build a co-housing community because it's like this. It's so non-standard that it doesn't fit into the regular financial system. So that to me is the bananas part. Not that we should force people to do it. It's that our structures don't allow people to discover that easily. You know,
and it's because of zoning. That's a part of it.
There are actually a few websites now that help. There's coLiving.com, and there's I think cohousing.org allows you to find.
That's been around
these
for
things.
a while. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember that one.
coLiving.com is a little bit newer, and that allows you to find those kinds of things.
Right.
But sorry, Dylan, I think you were going to ask a question too.
Well, because I just remember like the video that I watched of yours that was all about radical alignment and body first living. You focused a lot on just nature and the hiking and the way the body responds from like our evolutionary point of view. But I don't remember you diving deep into any frameworks around social, like health or wellness.
So I haven't gotten to the videos of that yet. I'm working on a course and a book, so the videos are coming too. But yeah, so going back to like Dunbar's number that we brought up earlier, like humans, like we naturally, our brains are kind of calibrated to have a village, to keep track of a village of about 150 people. And some of the larger co-housing communities usually cap out at about that size. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. But also the tribal unit. Throughout most of human history, the tribal unit was between anywhere from like 3 to 20-ish people. And that's kind of like the standard like family tribal unit, that's also the typical size of a co-living, like the maximum size of the apartments that you can find on co-living. And so like one of the projects that I have that I'm at the very early stages of is actually how can we create an economically viable and sustainable and repeatable model that allows for developers like high-end, commercial developers to build co-living and co-housing communities. Because I think that there's only a few changes. Olga, to your point about like zoning laws, like you can fit a lot of these within existing frameworks for zoning laws for commercial development. But the thing is going back to incentives, the biggest problem is that, okay, developer moves into, buys a 500 or 1,500 acre parcel and they want to get the maximum ROI. So what do? They cut it up into 10th acre lots that are all in a row and they build the biggest house that they can on that, and then they're done. And so what you can do is you can use city ordinances, you can use zoning laws, you could force them to build a different model, or you could incentivize them to build a different model by just showing them, hey, look, here's another kind of neighborhood to build. This is all hypothetical. This is, if I had a blank checkbook, this is what I would do. I would do this experiment where he's like, okay, what if we can actually build a model? It's like the difference between American cities and walkable cities. What if we just show that there is another way of building neighborhoods that creates these structures and these affordances, that is more attractive to investors, that is more attractive to everyone, and so then they're willing to pay for it. But again, we don't have that right now.
Right.
Have anybody
actually
heard
do.
of the book that's called Triumph of the City?
We do.
Oh, sorry, I'll throw out one quick book. But there, an author named Edward Glazer did a book called. Sorry, I'll just make it really quick. But there's a book called Triumph of the City. Edward Glazer wrote it, and he talks a ton about how the structure of these cities are built and how people colliding and interacting with each other like changes the way ideas and patents and businesses and entrepreneurs and happiness are. So it's a good read if you guys are into that stuff. But go ahead.
So, like New York and a lot of other cities, they actually have the opposite issue. Developers, they want to build like towers. They want to build many units. And it's the community boards that are preventing it. Even politicians, they are open to it. They're open to changing zoning laws. And every time, like so many times I see these different developments proposed where you will have hundreds of units that will become available, that will increase housing supply and will take off, this pressure that we currently have on the housing shortage that is very strong in New York, but really beginning to kind of happen nationwide. And developers want to do it. They will get more money actually by building more condos or more apartments than they will by only having like one house on a giant lot. But I constantly see it over and over again that these community boards, which have a lot of political power that they exert on politicians, that it just ends up falling through all the time. I see it left and right, falls up throwing through, and especially like neighborhoods that people want to live in, neighborhoods where there's accessibility, that are walkable, or neighborhoods that can become walkable, like by train stations. Out in Long Island, you have like desolate land basically, and you have so much land that is constantly, there's proposals for development there, and they're just always shot down. So I think it's really, that is more in the society aspect than it is in the developer aspect. We still want to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to these incentives, and like, I hate to be that guy that's like, well, then tax them different or put more legislation in place. But once you get the incentives right, people like want to make money. So they take that piece of land and they try to maximize the money, and they end up with the most money they can make, and we have to end up also with the kind of society or structure that we want to.
Well, incentives don't work. So there's actually been a decent amount of research that shows that when it comes to development, like for cities, so like the federal government and state government will give cities incentives to develop, and it doesn't get taken advantage of. And again, it doesn't get taken advantage of because there is constantly the societal pressure, because people don't want their taxes going up. So the more development you have in an area, the higher your housing taxes are going to be. And people with way too much time on their hands, unfortunately, that are the ones that are going to benefit from it, that are not going to benefit from development, are the ones that are exerting all these forces. Incentives are left and right. And, even like I had a lot of hope when, the current governor came, began serving. She made all these promises, that she was going to help, with development by forcing these constraints. And developers were very happy about it. But she had to take a step back because of all the societal pressure. So she's like, all right, well, I guess we're going to go back to incentives, and they're not working.
So it doesn't always work.
Nope.
But we are way over. So I want to thank you guys for staying on so late, as I was caught up in traffic and almost ran out of gas. But yeah, so it sounds like there's a few things that have kind of emerged that we all really, really agree on. One is the importance of choice, even if it does come at the cost of maybe the problem of choice or even overindulgence. But we've talked a lot about structuring your life in such a way, using forcing functions and affordances to kind of create the behaviors, the patterns of life that you want to see. And there's a lot that we think not all agreement on, but that a lot is going to change, and that there's a lot of options. So I just want to thank all you guys for jumping in and hanging out for the last hour and a half as we were ramping up to record and then hit record. So I'll give you guys the last word. Chad, what do you want to close out with?
Yeah, actually wanted to write something down so I could get it exactly. So if I was gonna offer any piece of like advice from my own last 3 years of my experience, kind of roughing it in the woods, I wrote it down so I would say it clearly. It is: use the smart part of your brain to design healthy stress into your life, so the dumb part of your brain can't avoid it. That one nugget has changed my life.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Dylan, what you got for us?
I don't know. I mean, I went on my own kind of body alignment journey, and I felt like sleep and circadian rhythm were like the two biggest things that I felt made an impact. So just realizing that there is a little clock, and we didn't talk about this, but inside your body that knows what time it is. And if you eat at the same time every day and you wake up at the same time every day, you can start feeling pretty good. And I try not to mess with that too much to stay happy. So
good advice. Olga, what you got?
I think find purpose in whatever it is that you're doing. That purpose can literally come from anywhere. You know, it can come from love, like Dylan talked about. It can come from financial gain, from family, just something that you enjoy doing. But find purpose. And I think AGI and AI even now will be there along the way to help us find that purpose.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much. Please stay on after I hit stop so that the recording can finish uploading. And yeah, we'll do an after action report.